Not many game companies can say that they revolutionized the industry on multiple occasions, but that's what Rare did with their amazing titles spanning 2 decades. So I am Thegamerfrommars, and this is a rise and fall of Rare. In 1982, two ex-arcade programmers by the names of Tim and Chris Stamper started a little-known company called Ashby Computers and Graphics in England, which would later be known as Ultimate Play the Game. Their first release was Jetpack, in which you fly around the stage collecting pieces of your spaceship. The game was a huge success to the point that almost 1/3 of all Spectrum home computer owners had it. Tim and Chris were working 18 hours a day to continue their success with titles such as Trans Am, Cookie, and Saber Wolf. While their games were released on multiple systems, they were mainly known for their work on the Spectrum home computer. In 1984, the brothers discovered a new little system called the Famicom. Designed by a small company called Nintendo, which at the time was only known for Donkey Kong, this new system made the Stamper brothers think big. So shortly after, they made a subdivision of their company which had the codename of Rare, whose sole purpose was to break the code for Famicom games and learn as much as they could about them. In 1985, Tim and Chris sold Ultimate Play the Game to US Gold. They realized that the Spectrum home computers would be old news in a year or two, so they sold their company and went on to their next challenge. So the brothers packed their bags and went to Japan to talk with Nintendo about developing games. Surprisingly, Nintendo gave their new company Rare an unlimited budget and let them make as many games as they could. While working on the Nintendo Entertainment System, as it became known in the US, they were producing games at a rate of 1 per month. These games varied from Jeopardy to Battletoads to Nightmare on Elm Street. Later on, they developed games for the Game Gear, Genesis, and Game Boy. Because they started creating games for the Famicom on the ground floor, they had a very steady cash flow by the time that the Super Nintendo was released. With that extra money, they took a chance and bought SiliconGraphics, which made them one of the most advanced developers in the world. With their new powerful CGI technology, Nintendo saw them as useful and bought 49% of Rare, making them a second-party developer for Nintendo. At this point, Nintendo offered Rare their choice of any Nintendo character to make a game out of, and they chose Donkey Kong. In 1994, Donkey Kong was released to the Super Nintendo. The game was instantly a huge success. The 3D rendered graphics were impressive, the music was catchy, and it brought DK back on the map. Donkey Kong became the second best-selling game on the Super Nintendo with over 9 million units sold. While Rare continued to crank out Donkey Kong games, they also had success in the arcade market with Killer Instinct. Rare was on a roll, and with Nintendo's new 64-bit system coming, there was no stop in sight. While their first game on the Nintendo 64 was Blast Corps, their next huge success started a few years before. In 1995, Nintendo received the rights to the new James Bond movie GoldenEye. Nintendo promptly handed the project over to Rare. Originally an on-rail shooter for the SNES, it later became a first-person shooter on the Nintendo 64. The game revolutionized the genre by adding features that were never seen before. There were mission objectives, headshots, and an awesome multiplayer mode. While the game was released 3 years after the movie, it didn't stop it from becoming a huge success. While the critics raved, consumers bought, to the point that it was the third best-selling game on the Nintendo 64 with a whopping 8 million units sold. Rare was on a roll. While designing their next big hit, Rare developed Diddy Kong Racing to hold their fans over until the release of Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo was Rare's answer to Super Mario 64, and it was critically acclaimed. A sequel was also on the N64 and was released a few years later. After that, the Stamper brothers decided to make a new first-person shooter, but they didn't want it to be about James Bond this time around. So that's how Perfect Dark was created. It was in a lot of ways better than GoldenEye, and the reviews were almost all positive, but unfortunately it didn't sell very well, only getting a fraction of the sales of GoldenEye. After that, Rare went on to produce a game based on Conquer the Squirrel. Originally going to be a lighthearted 3D platformer, it turned into a raunchy, vulgar game about a squirrel with a hangover. Conker's Bad Fur Day was rated M for mature and the critics loved it, but not surprisingly its sales were awful. It also didn't help that Nintendo disowned Conker and that it was one of the last games on the N64. At this point, Rare wasn't doing so well with two major failures, but this is only the beginning of the problems. In 2000, Microsoft was planning the release of their new console, and they had their eyes set on the talent over at Rare. In 2002, Microsoft bought 100% of Rare for $377 million, making them a first-party developer. The same month that Microsoft bought out Rare, their last second-party Nintendo title was released on the GameCube. Originally titled Dinosaur Planet, the game was turned into Star Fox Adventures by the request of Shigeru Miyamoto. Now, by the time Microsoft bought out Rare, a lot of the key players already left the company to start their own. The most famous example of this is Free Radical Design, who went on to create the Time Splitter series. The first game they designed on the new Xbox system was Grabbed by the Ghoulies, which was a huge flop. This was probably caused because of the mediocre reviews, repetitive gameplay, and overall cheesy look of the game. Microsoft allowed Rare to create Game Boy Advance games because they weren't competing in the handheld market. Some of these works on the Game Boy Advance included It's Mr. Pants and two Banjo-Kazooie games. Their second and last game on the Xbox was a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day, which received good reviews mainly because it was a remake of a great game. While Rare had spent the better part of 5 years at Microsoft designing handheld titles, Microsoft gave them a new task of designing two launch titles for their new system, the Xbox 360. Instead of starting from scratch, Rare took two games on their back burner and finished them for the launch of this next generation system. Cameo Elements of Power was a game originally for the Nintendo 64, then the GameCube, then the Xbox, and finally the Xbox 360. The game had you take control of an elf that could transform into different creatures. The game was liked by critics and sold well enough. The second title was Perfect Dark Zero, which was a prequel to the original game. The reviews for this title were mediocre and the fans of the original were furious because it was nowhere near the quality of the first game. After bad sales of Viva Pinata, founder Tim and Chris left Rare after more than 2 decades at the company they built. When asked why, they said to pursue other interests. When the two founders left the company, Rare decided to make a new Banjo-Kazooie game entitled Nuts and Bolts, but sales were terrible mainly due to the fact that the main gameplay mechanic was based around a vehicle system, which fans complained had nothing to do with the series. In 2010, Microsoft reworked Rare into a Kinect exclusive developer. Now they currently make Kinect sports games. Although everything that made Rare great is gone, we can still look back and appreciate what they did for the industry, so thanks for watching.